Defense isn't stable year to year. It's hard to predict who's going to be good and who's not going to be good on defense. But there was nothing fluky about what the Packers did last year.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You were Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast to iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet. And the show for fans who know what happened, they want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. As we head into 2025, there's going to be a lot of rehashing of what happened in 2024 to try and predict all of this. And it will lead to plenty of bad faith arguments, and it will lead to plenty of nonsense, and it will lead to the dumbest top 10 lists you've ever read. And what I'm finding as we are heading back toward 2025 for a new season is some of the arguments we had to push back against last year and into the early parts of the offseason are making their way back about the 2025 Green Bay Packers, trying to predict, okay, is this going to be a good defense? And this relates to the conversations that we've had about this cornerback room and why it has been difficult for people to wrap their brains around the fact that the 2024 Packers defense was good. In a lot of the same ways that it was difficult for people to wrap their brains around the fact that the 2024 Packers offense was really good, because there weren't a lot of players that you would draft on your fantasy football team, or at least not draft early in your fantasy football team. And, you know, I saw this argument being made by Brett Coleman, who's a NFL YouTuber, about how, you know, he doesn't know what to make of the Packers, Xavier McKinney. It was really Xavier McKinney and duct taped this all together. And that was the conversation we were having early last year was, okay, well, but this doesn't actually make sense because they're really just getting opportunistic turnovers. Except that's not really what happened over the course of the season. If you exclude turnovers last year, so you take them away, turnovers are volatile. They cannot be relied on game to game, play to play, down. You're just not, to be a good defense, generally, you need to have success regularly. It can't just be, we're really good in the red zone, we're really good on third down, we create turnovers. That stuff is not sustainable generally, except, of course, last year, like every playoff game was decided by the team that turned the ball over the least. That team won the game. You generated a bunch of turnovers and you won. Washington's defense last year, by and large, cheeks, but in the biggest game of their season, the biggest win of their season, they created 1 million turnovers and they beat the Detroit Lions. If you can do that, you can win. And there are teams, not to get too far down this rabbit hole, but there are teams that are built to create turnovers. Like drafted, signed players to create turnovers. You draft ball hawk players, guys who generate turnovers in the passing game, or who rush the passer to create turnovers, to create pressure, to create off-target throws, or who create forced fumbles, those kinds of things. And then there are defenses. There are chaos defenses. Joe Barry was not one of them. Joe Barry was we are going to make you drive the ball on us every time you have it. You're going to have to go 12, 15, 18 plays and score. That didn't work because they had that mindset, didn't create any turnovers, didn't create any explosive plays, and still gave up the big plays despite trying to put a roof on everything. So this was a team that was very good even without the turnovers. And I went back and dug this, a little deeper here. From week 9 through the playoff game, so half the season, the Packers were 5th in EPA per play defensively. Xavier McKinney had 2 interceptions in that stretch, and one of them was in a game where they blew the doors off the UC Santa Clara 49ers. So that was not the reason that they won that game. And then the other interception was against the Bears in a game they lost. So don't tell me it was the interceptions. By the way, if you exclude turnovers from that sample, they go all the way from 5th in EPA per play. They fall all the way down the list to 5th in EPA per play. It was a good defense. And it is hard to understand because for a lot of the same reasons that there is this struggle with the offense, because the frontline players are just not there. This was a better defense last year, adjusting for schedules, so by DVOA, than the Steelers, than the Chargers. Oh, they Jim Harbaugh, they've got him playing defense. You bring in your former Michigan coach. He's the new hotness. Packers had a better defense by DVOA. Then the Bills. Oh, but Sean McDermott, he's a genius. Then the Chiefs. Oh, Steve Spagnuolo, Chris Jones. They're awesome. No, Packers had a better defense. I know that's hard to understand. But the reason, and I went back and forth with Brett a little bit on this, and he was like, oh, yeah, well, the middle of the field defense, they allowed some explosive plays, but their passer rating was bad. And it's like, you could parse this any way you wanted to, and if you got granular enough, you could find a part of the field that, like, the Legion of Boom Seahawks were vulnerable in. A couple of years ago, I remember 2019, that really good 49ers team. They were like 30th in deep ball DVOA. When teams threw deep on them, they had a lot of success. Except here's the problem. You couldn't throw deep on them because they rushed the passer so well. So you didn't have time to throw deep on them. Oh, well, the Packers faced, a bottom 3 number of deep passes. Yeah, well, they played a lot of cover 2, which they tried to do with Joe Barry, and it didn't work. And Xavier McKinney having 5 interceptions in 5 games at the beginning of the season, it didn't have the sorts of effects that were asserted here, but teams just stopped trying them. Xavier McKinney and Evan Williams said that on the record that was happening. That teams just were not even trying to get the ball down the field because the implication here is that they were just so afraid of turning the ball over, that just the fear of creating a turnover was enough to make the defense work. Well, guess what? It's good as a defense to be feared. Teams didn't try to throw the ball deep against that 49ers team because they were afraid of calling a play where they had to hold the ball long enough to do that, even if it was the case that if they could protect it up. Richard Sherman was an older corner in that moment, not the fastest guy. Those safeties had some inconsistencies. The Packers had opportunities that I remember in that regular season game that they missed. In that playoff game that they finally started hitting in the second half, they finally just said, screw it, let Devontae's down there somewhere. Let's just try and take some shots. And it worked, and they started moving the ball, but it was too little too late. If you want to project this defense forward, I understand saying they don't have the talent of some of these other defenses. That was true last year. Like, I pulled the numbers up from True Media. If you go back and you look on 3rd down, which is when you want your pass rushers making money, out of 177 qualifying defenders, Lucas Van Ness finished 163 in 3rd down pressure rate. 163 out of 177. Kenny Clark was 161st. 161st and 163rd out of 177. That is an atrocity. And guess what? They were top 10 defense. That's why this doesn't make sense to people, because the players who were supposed to be contributing in meaningful ways, Kenny Clark is supposed to be a frontline player, was hurt. Didn't have his best season. Lucas Van Ness, first round pick. They needed him. The expectation coming into the season was they were going to need him. And they didn't do anything. Now, he was hurt first half of the season, and then he admitted he allowed that injury to trickle into his play in the second half of the season when he was more effective. But when you're trying to project forward based on the sustainable pieces of this, they didn't get some crazy, pressure to sack conversion rate. No Kyler Fackrell nonsense here. They did not rely on turnovers. Now, their success rate defensively was lower. Significantly lower, like in the 20s. 23rd, I believe, in success rate last year defensively. But they wanted to invite some variance. Part of that is the defense. They wanted to be a little bit more risk-reward. You're not always going to generate turnovers, but if you can generate incompletions, if you can generate pressures that turn into incompletions, or pressures that turn into sacks, or pressures that turn into throwaways, or you can run blitz on an early down and create negative plays, that's part of your identity defensively. And they do have players. Rashawn Gary, really good football players. Xavier McKinney was first team All-Pro last year. Edgerrin Cooper could be on his way to a first team All-Pro type, at least at some point in his career, that kind of season, that kind of player. So if you're looking for reasons to poke holes in their resume, you have to do it on the talent front. The problem is that was true last year, and they were really good. Now, speaking of trying to poke holes in the talent front, let's talk about these receivers. I want to bust some narratives here. We'll do that next on Locked On Packers. Have you ever decided at the last minute to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day and you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, or even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime makes it possible. Gametime has last minute tickets and zone deals for big savings like 10% off exclusive zone deals for FIFA Club World Cup matches. See views right in the app before you buy so you know exactly where you'll be. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first ticket purchase. Terms do apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price, guaranteed. Who is going to beat man coverage for the Green Bay Packers? This is something we've talked a lot about. And Dontayvion Wicks is one of those names that comes up because he is a natural separator. He is someone who gets open consistently against coverage. But last year, he was the least efficient receiver in the NFL against man coverage. The least efficient receiver in the NFL. He averaged against man coverage, according to True Media, 5.3 yards per catch. 5.3 yards per catch against man coverage. The worst by a long shot among receivers. Second worst was Wan'Dale Robinson, New York Giants, with, a cavalcade of suck at quarterback. 7.1 yards per catch. 7.1 would be a miracle relative to 5.3. That's bad. And part of it, yes, is the drops. But he had the exact same drop rate against man coverage that he almost to the 100th decimal point. The same drop rate against man as he did against zone. Until that changes, this thing is not changing for Dontayvion Wicks. Until he can prove consistently that he can catch the ball, there's nothing you can do here. 5.3. 5.3. I mean, you guys, that Jahmyr Gibbs was more efficient running the ball than Dontayvion Wicks was being thrown to against man coverage. I understand drops bring down the average. But come on. 3 drops in 28 targets. Still 28 targets that's at least 2 a game. Well, okay, it's almost 2 a game. My math was not great there for a second. I was thinking 38. Still, it's not a huge sample size, to be sure. It's not. Now, the other problem here is that Jayden Reed was not that much better. Not that much better. Against man coverage, the only receivers with a worse reception percentage. So when you're throwing the ball, you get thrown the ball. How often do you catch those passes? The only receivers with worse reception percentages against man coverage, with at least as many targets as Jayden Reed got in man coverage, Quentin Johnston, who is like infamous for his drops, and Dontayvion Wicks. That means the 2 most drop-happy receivers in the NFL, which they were, happened to be the most drop-happy receivers in the NFL against man coverage. Now, I happen to think this is a silver lining, at least in the case of Jayden Reed. And here's why. I don't think this is a situation where Jayden Reed just cannot get open against man coverage. And you're like, okay, it's contested catch situations. Think about the Jayden Reed drops. They're balls that he should catch. It's not about, oh, he's too small. His arms aren't long enough. His hands aren't big enough. He's not big enough to wall off defenders, not strong enough to make those plays in traffic. No, that's not it. And you know how I know that that's not it? Because I know what the numbers are when he's a zone receiver. When he is a zone receiver. So against zone coverage. So yes, more opportunities to be running open. But there's still going to be contested situations. He's still going to have to take a catch or catch the ball and take a hit. Jayden Reed was first with a bullet in reception percentage against zone coverage last year. Number 1 in the NFL among receivers. And he was 4th in yards per catch. So not only is he catching everything, 86% success rate against zone coverage in terms of catching the ball when he's targeted. That's a ton. And 4th in yards per catch. So it's not like he's getting a bunch of these dump offs, screens, underneath check down looks. No, he was like the number 1 murderer of zone coverage last year among receivers. That's what Jayden Reed was. So the idea that he's the best zone receiver in the NFL and one of the worst man receivers in the NFL, just they don't square. They just don't square. Like, he doesn't have bad hands. And again, is he going to do the thing that, like, you know, Justin Jefferson might be able to go up and moss somebody? There are receivers like that. George Pickens, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase. No, Jayden Reed's not like that, but like either is Amon-Ra St. Brown. He just catches everything. Zone coverage, man coverage. And it's not like he's got a bunch of contested catch situations that he's got to deal with either. He just catches everything. And so I renew my claim that Jayden Reed can do a lot of the things that Amon-Ra St. Brown can also do. He just has to be a little bit more consistent catching the ball. And the fact that he was so like the best in the league catching the ball as a zone receiver tells me that the man coverage stuff is not really about his ability to get open. It's a concentration thing. Now, maybe it's a pressure thing. You see more man coverage in the red zone. You see more man coverage on 3rd down. But he doesn't strike me as the kind of player who's gonna let the moment get to him. And why would the moment be any different in zone coverage? That doesn't make any sense, really. Now, the other piece of this, George Kittle was the only tight end who averaged more yards per catch versus zone coverage last year than Tucker Kraft. And maybe we need to do a whole open on Tucker Kraft again. Because let me give you another Tucker Kraft number here. Tucker Kraft was 4th in the NFL among pass catchers. Not just tight ends. 4th in the NFL among pass catchers in reception percentage against man coverage last year. Fourth, I'm going to say it again. Among pass catchers in the NFL, tight ends and receivers, only 3 players caught the ball when it was thrown to them against man coverage more often than Tucker Kraft. Now, he said he wants to get better at getting open against man coverage, winning one-on-one, being split out, and say, hey, it's you and me. One-on-one, mano a mano, and I'm just going to go win. But when he got the opportunities in those moments, when Jordan Love threw him the ball, he converted. He was by far their most consistent pass catcher last year. And that zone coverage stat I gave you. So George Kittle was the only tight end who averaged more yards per catch against zone coverage last year than Tucker Kraft. Tucker Kraft averaged more than Justin Jefferson, than Jalen Waddle, than George Pickens, than T. Higgins. Those are dynamic receivers. And zone coverage is the coverage you're going to face 65, 70% of the time in the NFL. In order to be, you can't be a good receiver in the NFL if you can't win against zone coverage. Now, that's a lot of that is feel, a lot of that is design, but a lot of that is just like, I'm better than you, and I have good enough hands to make these plays. Tucker Kraft, the most consistent, the most reliable player, pass catcher on this Packers team. He's got to get the ball more. I don't think the solution to this offense's problems against man coverage is Dontayvion Wicks, even if I think he is the most intuitive, natural X receiver on this team. I continue to believe that it's Tucker Kraft, and I continue to believe that Jayden Reed does not have some intractable problem against man coverage. I just don't. I don't buy it. It doesn't make sense. Now, Jordan Love. Jordan Love. We're going to talk about it. We'll talk about it next on Locked On Packers. There's been some Jordan Love, the stats fell off. And I think people like to point to the touchdown passes and say, oh, well, look, the touchdown passes. And I was going through some of the numbers. I was having way too much fun on True Media. And I went back and looked, and in 2023, Jordan Love, when the Packers were historically good, remember, historically good scoring, goal-to-go situations, like over 90% success rate, scoring inside the low red zone. I mean, they were unbelievable. 61% success rate, low red zone. Their TD rate was crazy, almost double the league average in those situations. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. Jordan Love, in 2023, now again, playing a whole season, scored 15 touchdowns in the low red zone. 15 touchdowns. Seems good. Only Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Patrick Mahomes, Dak Prescott had more. Okay, now you go to 2024. Take me to 2024. Well, Jordan Love was not even number one on his own team in touchdowns. He had 10 touchdowns last year, had 9 passing touchdowns in goal-to-go situations. Josh Jacobs, meanwhile, had 15 touchdowns in goal-to-go situations. The Packers were able to run the ball more effectively. And so they didn't need Jordan Love to do this. We, as people who watch the Packers all the time, are used to Aaron Rodgers. They used to throw the ball inside the 5-yard line a ton because Rodgers to whomever was pretty automatic. Rodgers to Jordy Nelson, Rodgers to Devontae Adams, Rodgers to James Jones, Randall Cobb. They could score at will, low red zone, it seemed. Now, of course, you go back and you look, and there are some years where they didn't have the best red zone offense. And that 2020 team, the gold zone, I mean, they were historically good. And then 2021, 2022, not quite as good. But they liked to throw in the low red zone, and Aaron Rodgers benefited from it. He got a lot of touchdown passes out of it. And then Mike McCarthy went to Dallas, and Dak Prescott throws a bunch of touchdown passes in the low red zone. They've got a lot of good concepts. Now, I think there's some reasonable cases to say, hey, it's actually really valuable to have quarterbacks that can throw touchdowns in those situations. Joe Burrow had 24 offensive touchdowns last year, 23 of them throwing. And that's great, but that's a lot. That's a lot. And that means they were throwing a lot in those situations. But Josh Jacobs and Jordan Love combined for 25. So, like, if Joe Burrow is scoring 24, maybe you just need your running backs to get a couple in there. I think there's a lot of value in having a run game. Pro Football Focus did a study a couple years ago where they found the perfect play is actually a perfectly blocked run play. Because on a perfectly blocked run play, the only thing that can go wrong is a fumble, and a fumble on a given play is very unlikely. Whereas on a passing play, you could have all sorts of things that can go wrong. There's more variance. Bad throws, drops, tips, interceptions, those kinds of things. On a run play, it's just the handoff, a perfectly blocked run play. You're off to the races. Doesn't mean it's going to be a touchdown, but low red zone, you have to be, even Aaron Rodgers, when they would throw the ball a bunch, would lament, hey, it'd be great if we could run the ball down here. Well, the Packers were able to do that last year, but they did it at the expense of the stats that were, beefed up a little bit in 2023 by this issue. Well, part of an issue's in scare quotes. It's not an issue. It's a champagne problem because there's no problem really. They're scoring. They didn't lose games in 2024 or really in 2023 because they couldn't score in the low red zone. Jordan Love can create in the low red zone, can score, can be an efficient low red zone passer, did not turn the ball over last year in those situations, which is crucial. But they didn't need him to. And having a run game, having a player like Josh Jacobs where you can just give him the ball 3 times and in goal-to-go situations, he's almost certainly going to score. Pretty good. Pretty good. In fact, when you look at these players, the players who scored the most in those goal-to-goal situations, Josh Jacobs led the league in scoring among non-quarterbacks. Now you look at these numbers, like Jared Goff, 20 touchdowns in the low red zone. For a team that could really run the ball, they threw it a bunch. And then you have someone like Jalen Hurts, who, when they got close, they're going to tush push their way in. He had 25 rushes in the low red zone. Josh Jacobs had 34. That's crazy. So when you hear people say, oh, well, the numbers, they're not as good, he regressed, all that stuff. Well, no. Part of the reason why he didn't have as many touchdown passes is they didn't need him to throw the ball. They had Josh Jacobs. They had this weapon. Maybe in 2025, they can do a better job of maximizing both. And you don't need to get to your 92% success rates, your historically good numbers to be a good offense. This was a good offense last year, 3rd in DVOA, top 10 in EPA per play, all that good stuff. But I want to make sure that we have the right understanding of the context here. One of the reasons why Jordan Love didn't throw quite as many interceptions is when he was, the second or third, whatever it was last year, I think the second most interceptions, listen to me, the second most touchdowns in the league. Part of the reason was they had to throw the ball a little bit more in the low red zone. Now they don't have to, and that's a good thing. It's a good thing because you need to score touchdowns in those situations, but you'd like to have a low risk option to score touchdowns, and Josh Jacobs being that guy is exactly what you want. More to come here on Locked On Packers this week. Follow me on the social medias. Follow the podcast wherever you get podcasts. Subscribe to what we're doing here on Locked On Packers. We're going to bring you through to training camp, the regular season, all the good stuff as part of this year on Locked On Packers. Cannot wait to bring you so much good stuff this year on Locked On Packers. So subscribe over on our YouTube page. Wherever you get podcasts, you can watch us on our YouTube page so you can stay Locked On Packers.